I didn't think much about it at the time. It was just a Thursday a drag of a day, like any other school day in ninth grade. You know the type. I'd been running on fumes since first period. Barely slept the night before because I got sucked into watching some conspiracy documentary on YouTube about haunted lighthouses. Stupid, I know. But once I'm in, I'm in. So by the time my alarm went off at 6:30, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. School didn't make things any better. Mrs. Andrews sprung a pop quiz on us in algebra. Like, who even does that? Pop quizzes should be illegal. She walked in with that smug smile she always had when she was about to ruin someone's day. I stared at the paper for a solid 5 minutes, convinced I'd been handed something in a foreign language. I guessed half the answers. Pretty sure one of my answers was just 42, because I couldn't remember how to do quadratic equations. Whatever. One more thing to tank my grade. By lunchtime, I'd hit peak exhaustion. I sat with my usual group: Ryan, Tommy, and Malik. Ryan kept going on about this new game he'd been grinding on Steam, and Malik was roasting him for spending his entire weekend stuck in his basement instead of hanging out. "You're turning into a troll, dude," Malik said, chucking a crumpled napkin at him. Ryan, ever the dramatic one, grabbed his tray and acted like he was about to walk off. "Trolls don't need friends," he shot back, smirking before sitting right back down. I didn't say much during lunch. My mind was fried from that quiz, and honestly, I just wanted to get through the rest of the day. Tommy noticed and nudged me with his elbow. "You good, man?" he asked, his mouth half full of pizza. "Yeah, just tired," I muttered, taking a bite of my own slice. Truth was, I'd had this weird undercurrent of anxiety all day. It's hard to explain. It wasn't like I was panicking or anything, but there was this gnawing feeling like something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I shrugged it off as just being overtired. The rest of the day crawled by. Mr. Harris's history lecture on the Great Depression might as well have been an audio lullaby. By the time the final bell rang, I was out of there like a bat out of hell. I wasn't planning on staying for any after-school activities or hanging around with friends. I just wanted to get home, maybe grab a nap or veg out in front of the television. My walk home was usually the best part of my day. I liked the quiet. The route took me through a couple of neighborhoods, past a strip mall, and then across this busy intersection right before my street. It wasn't a long walk, maybe 15 minutes, but it gave me time to decompress. No teachers, no homework, just me, my headphones, and whatever playlist I'd cobbled together the night before. That day, though, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Not in a dramatic, horror movie kind of way. Just this low-level hum of tension under my skin. It was like when you're walking through a dark alley at night and your senses are on high alert, even if you don't see anything threatening. I kept glancing over my shoulder for no reason, checking my surroundings like I was expecting something to jump out at me. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself. I adjusted my backpack and focused on the music blasting in my ears. Something upbeat from a band Tommy had recommended. It helped for a bit, but the feeling wouldn't fully go away. When I reached the intersection, the pedestrian light was red. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through texts. My mom had sent one earlier reminding me to pick up some milk on the way home. Classic mom move. If it wasn't milk, it was eggs or bread. I sighed and shot her a quick "got it" reply. As I put my phone back in my pocket, I noticed a car speeding down the street. It wasn't close enough to be a danger, but it stuck out because the driver wasn't slowing down at all. The pedestrian light turned green, and I stepped off the curb. I'd crossed this intersection 100 times before without any issues. Still, that uneasy feeling tightened in my chest. I glanced both ways again, just to be sure, and saw the car from earlier coming up fast. "What the hell is that guy doing?" I muttered under my breath. The car was probably a good 2 blocks away, but something about the way it was moving made my instincts scream at me to stop. I froze in the middle of the crosswalk, my mind racing. The logical part of me was yelling that I had the right of way, that there was no reason to be this paranoid. But that gut feeling didn't care about logic. Time felt like it slowed down. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, drowning out the music in my headphones. The car was getting closer, too fast to be legal. It felt like a scene from one of those action movies where everything builds to a split-second decision. I knew I had to move, but my feet wouldn't cooperate. And then it hit meant the car, but a sudden, overwhelming dizziness. It was like all the blood drained from my head in an instant. The world tilted, and my vision blurred around the edges. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a steel band around my ribs. I staggered, gasping for air that didn't seem to be there. My knees buckled, and before I could process what was happening, I was on the ground. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was the blaring horn of the car and the rush of footsteps coming toward me. Then, nothing. Just a void. No dreams, no sound. Just emptiness. Looking back on it now, at 25, I can tell you exactly what happened. It wasn't just a fainting spell. It was sudden cardiac arrest. But at the time, all I knew was that I went from being a normal, tired teenager to lying flat on the cold pavement in a matter of seconds. And I had no idea just how close to the edge. At least, I don't think it did. But before I blacked out, there was this brief momenta flash of sensations I can still feel when I think about it. I didn't know it at the time, but it was my heart malfunctioning, going into something called ventricular fibrillation, a life-threatening rhythm disturbance, where the heart's electrical system misfires in complete chaos. It started with a rush of dizziness, like standing up too fast, only 100 times worse. My vision blurred and dimmed at the edges, closing in like tunnel vision. A wave of heat surged through me next, sudden and overwhelming, followed by an icy chill that shot down my spine. It was as if my body couldn't decide whether I was burning or freezing. I later learned this happens because your circulatory system is breaking down, cutting off the proper flow of blood and oxygen to critical organs. My chest felt tight, really tight. Not like a sharp pain, but more like someone had strapped a heavy belt around my ribcage and was pulling it tighter and tighter. I tried to inhale, but my lungs wouldn't expand. No matter how hard I gasped, it was like sucking air through a pinhole. A pounding sound echoed in my ears, thump, then suddenly stuttered and stopped. That was my heart losing rhythm. The normal electrical impulses that control heartbeat had become erratic and useless, causing my heart's ventricles to quiver instead of pump. Without a functioning heartbeat, my blood pressure plummeted, starving my brain of oxygen in seconds. I felt my knees give out first. My muscles went limp like a marionette with its strings cut. Gravity yanked me to the ground, but I barely registered the impact. By the time my body hit the asphalt, I was slipping further into the void. Inside that void, it wasn't just darkness. It was nothingness, complete sensory deprivation. My mind struggled to grasp it like being caught in a silent vacuum. Time didn't exist. There was no sound, no touch, no light. Only a faint, nagging awareness that I was somewhere I shouldn't be. Medically speaking, this was my brain reacting to severe hypoxia-oxygen deprivation. The human brain can only survive a few minutes without oxygen before irreversible damage sets in. But those first moments of collapse often create strange sensory experiences for people who've survived cardiac arrest. Some report out-of-body experiences. Others describe hallucinations. For me, it was a terrifying, endless void of sensation I'd never forget. At some point, sensations began creeping back in, as if my body were being rebooted in slow, agonizing stages. It started with cold and all-consuming cold, deep in my bones. Without blood circulation, my body temperature had started dropping. The chill was numbing, like being submerged in icy water. Next came a faint awareness of touch, rough hands pressing on my chest, rhythmic, forceful. Someone was doing CPR. I later learned how brutal effective CPR really is. You have to press hard enough to pump blood manually through the body at least 2 inches deep into the chest, often breaking ribs in the process. The pressure on my chest repeated over and over, accompanied by muffled voices above me. "Come on, kid. Stay with us." Even with the compressions forcing minimal blood flow to my brain, my thoughts were scattered and sluggish. I couldn't tell where I was or what was happening. All I knew was that I was somewhere between life and death, teetering on a razor-thin edge. The next jolt was unmistakable. An electric shock tore through my chest, snapping me halfway out of the void. My body arched slightly as my nervous system reacted to the sudden voltage. This was the defibrillator, delivering a shock to try and reset my heart's rhythm. I didn't fully feel the pain of it. Everything was too numbed by hypoxia, but the force of the shock was enough to briefly shake me out of the fog. "Still in VF," someone shouted. The voice was clearer now, though distant, like hearing through a tunnel. "Charging again. Clear." Another jolt hit. This time my body's response was stronger. My heart, which had been fluttering uselessly, gave a desperate, irregular kick. The chaos inside my chest began to settle, the electrical impulses resynchronizing into a faint but steady rhythm. My brain slowly registered the faint pulse as oxygenated blood finally began circulating again. "Got a pulse," one of the paramedics announced. Relief rippled through the voices around me, but I wasn't fully out of danger yet. I drifted in and out of awareness as they loaded me onto a stretcher. The cold asphalt was replaced by the cool, sterile surface of the ambulance gurney. Oxygen flooded into my lungs through a mask, each breath feeling painfully sharp but life-saving. Inside the ambulance, the paramedics monitored my vitals, speaking in quick, clipped tones. I caught bits and pieces: heart rate, blood pressure, neurological response. My body was weak, barely hanging on, but the void was gone. In its place was the overwhelming exhaustion of survival. "You're gonna be okay," one of the paramedics said softly. I didn't have the strength to respond, but something about his words anchored me. I wasn't dead. Not yet. Now that I'm 25, I understand just how critical every second was. Without CPR and defibrillation, I would have died right there in the street. Less than 10% of people survive out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, and most who do have lasting brain damage. I didn't know any of that at the time. All I knew was that I had slipped into the darkest place imaginable and somehow clawed my way back. I can't forget the sensations of that day, the crushing tightness in my chest, the suffocating void, the icy cold that gripped me as my heart failed. They're etched into my memory like scars. Even now, whenever I cross that same intersection, I feel a phantom chill and hear the echoes of those voices. They say your life flashes before your eyes when something catastrophic happens. But that's not what I saw. No warm memories, no comforting moments from the past. What I experienced was far from any of that. It was terrifying, unearthly, and way too vivid. It started with this strange feeling of detachment, like I was floating outside of my body. Gravity seemed to disappear, leaving me weightless. I saw the street where I'd collapsed my body lying on the pavement, surrounded by people moving in slow motion. Their voices were muffled and distorted, like someone had turned down the volume on reality. I couldn't move. I couldn't call out to them. "Come on, kid, breathe," someone shouted, but it felt like the sound was coming from miles away. I tried to focus, to force myself back into my body, but I was slipping further and further away. The world around me stretched and warped until it faded entirely. I wasn't there anymore. I was somewhere else. The place I found myself in wasn't warm or inviting. It was cold, not physically cold, but the kind of cold that burrows into your mind and freezes your thoughts. The air felt dense, heavy. I wasn't sure if I was standing, floating, or just existing in that space. There were no landmarks, no sky, no horizon, only darkness that stretched forever. At first, I thought I was alone, but then shapes began to emerge from the shadows. At the edges of my vision, I saw figures vaguely human but distorted, as though something had corrupted them. They moved slowly, aimlessly, like they were stuck in an endless loop. Their faces were blurred, smeared like unfinished paintings, but their eyes, those empty, abyss-like eyes, sent a chill through whatever part of me could still feel fear. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. I could feel their presence like a weight pressing on my mind. They carried with them an overwhelming sense of despair, a feeling so suffocating it made me want to collapse if I even had a body in that place. I wanted to run, to look away, but there was nowhere to go. The endless void surrounded me on all sides. Now I know this was my brain's reaction to a lack of oxygen. When your body isn't getting enough oxygen, your mind malfunctions, creating vivid sensory distortions. But at the time, I didn't understand any of that. It felt like I was truly trapped in a place beyond comprehension of void, where all warmth, all comfort, and all meaning had been stripped away. The figures grew closer. One of them broke away from the others and moved toward me. I felt a deep, primal terror, as though touching that figure would erase the last piece of me. I couldn't let that happen, but I couldn't move either. Just when I thought I was lost forever, the oppressive darkness began to crack. I heard faint sounds beeping, footsteps, voices. Charging. Clear. A blinding flash of light shattered the void, followed by a powerful jolt. It tore through my senses like an electric shock. My body, if I could even call it that, arched and spazzed as my awareness jolted violently. I didn't fully feel the pain, but I knew something had changed. Another flash hit, and this time I sensed my heartbeat, weak but steady. The chaos inside me was settling. "Pulse detected," a voice announced, this time clear and commanding. Relief echoed in the background. Suddenly, I was grounded in my body again. The cold pavement beneath me was solid and real. Air rushed into my lungs sharp, painful but welcome. I blinked, squinting against the blinding light overhead. My chest ached, each breath heavy and raw, but I didn't care. I was back in the world I understood. The paramedics surrounded me, working quickly. I caught snippets of their conversation, heart rhythm, oxygen levels, vitals. One of them adjusted the oxygen mask on my face. "You're gonna be okay," he said softly. I couldn't respond, but those words anchored me in reality. At 25, I now understand exactly what happened that day. Hypoxia-oxygen deprivation had triggered vivid hallucinations. My brain, in survival mode, created a terrifying world to fill the sensory void. But to this day, I'm not sure if that's all it was. It felt too real. That place wasn't fire and torment like you hear in stories. It was something worse. A place where nothing exists but endless cold and silence. Whenever I walk past that intersection, the memory creeps back. I hear the echoes of those voices urging me to fight, to hold on. And I remember how close I came to vanishing into that like a weight, suffocating and relentless. I had no sense of time, just the endless stretch of nothing. I felt like I was barely holding on, suspended in that space between wherever the hell I was and wherever the paramedics were trying to bring me back to. I wasn't even sure I wanted to come back. Part of me just wanted to sink deeper, to let go and disappear. But then, faint sounds started breaking through. Voices, urgent and sharp like distant echoes bouncing off the walls of a canyon. "Check the rhythm again," Still no pulse. Charge it one more time. Another voice chimed in, calm but firm, as if used to handling life or death situations. Keep compressions going. Don't let up. I could feel something now, faint and disjointed. Pressure. Deep, rhythmic pressure against my chest. It wasn't pleasant. It felt like someone was pounding me with a jackhammer, each compression sending shockwaves through the distant awareness I had of my body. I couldn't make sense of it. I was caught somewhere in between worlds, unable to fully return, but unable to leave either. Come on, kid, stay with us, a voice said, close but muffled, like it was filtering through layers of static. I wanted to respond, to tell them I was trying, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak. All I could do was float in that cold emptiness. And then the flash came, a sudden burst of searing light. Clear! The jolt ripped through me like an earthquake. For a brief moment, I felt my entire body convulse, nerves firing off like broken circuits. There was no pain exact, just this overwhelming surge of raw electricity snapping me halfway out of the void. My thoughts scrambled to catch up. I tried to grab onto the sensation, to use it as a lifeline, but it faded just as quickly as it came. The voices were louder now. Still the fib. Hit him again. The void pulsed around me, as though it were alive and reacting to the shock. It didn't want to let me go. I could feel it pulling me back, cold tendrils wrapping around my mind. Memories flashed random, disconnected moments. My mom's text about the milk. Ryan and Malik cracking jokes at lunch. Mrs. Andrews handing me that pop quiz with that smug smile on her face. For some reason, that memory stuck. I had to laugh, or at least I wanted to. A damn pop quiz. Of all the things to think about while hovering on the edge of existence, that was what my brain decided to latch onto. But it wasn't just the quiz. It was everything that came with it. The grind of daily life, the exhaustion of school, the dumb arguments and inside jokes with my friends. As stupid as it all seemed, it was mine, it was real. And I wasn't ready to let it go yet. Another shock slammed through me. Clear. This time, the void cracked wider. I felt a surge of Aranessa, faint, steady pulse deep in my chest. It was weak, irregular, but it was there. The cold started to recede, like shadows being chased away by light. The tendrils pulling me down began to loosen their grip. I wasn't out of danger yet, but something had shifted. I was fighting now, clawing my way back to the surface. Got a rhythm. The relief in the paramedic's voice was unmistakable. They weren't done, though. Compressions resumed, pushing hard and fast on my chest to keep blood flowing to my brain. I could hear them discussing my condition, heart rate, oxygen saturation, neurological response. It was all jargon to me, but one thing was clear. They weren't giving up, and neither was I. I don't know how long I drifted in and out of awareness, but eventually, the sensations became more consistent. I could feel the oxygen mask strapped to my face, the cold air rushing into my lungs. My heartbeat grew steadier, each thump anchoring me further in reality. The blinding lights of the ambulance filled my vision when I finally managed to crack my eyes open. Everything was too bright, too loud, but at least I was here. I was alive. You're doing good, kid. Just keep breathing, one of the paramedics said. His voice was gentler now, reassuring. I couldn't speak yet, my throat was raw, and my body felt like it had been hit by a truck, but I blinked slowly in acknowledgement. The paramedic gave a small nod. That's it. You're tough, huh? Tough. I didn't feel tough. I felt like I'd barely made it through the scariest experience of my life. But I guess I had made it. Somehow. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I started piecing things together. The shocks, the compressions, the voices, they'd pulled me back from that place. I didn't know how close I had come to being lost for good, and honestly, I didn't want to think about it too much. It was enough to know that I was still here. I heard one of the paramedics give a report to the hospital over the radio. Patient is stabilized. Sustained cardiac arrest due to VFib. CPR and defibrillation successful. Cardiac arrest. That's what had happened. I'd seen enough medical dramas to know how serious that was. I was one of the lucky ones, though. Most people don't make it when their heart stops outside a hospital. The fact that I was breathing again at all was a miracle. They continued monitoring me, checking my vitals and adjusting the oxygen flow. The world was still blurry, but it was real. The void was gone, replaced by the steady, rhythmic beat of my heart. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I'd been given another chance. The moment I fully woke up in the hospital. It wasn't like the movies where someone gasps awake and immediately knows what's going on. For me, it was more like coming out of a fog, slow and disorienting. Everything was blurry at first. The fluorescent lights overhead stung my eyes, and the constant beeping of monitors echoed in my ears. Hey, you're with us. That's good, a voice said gently. It was a nurse. She smiled at me, adjusting the oxygen tube hooked under my nose. Just take it easy, okay? You're safe now. Safe. That word echoed in my head. I blinked a few times, trying to piece everything together. The last clear memory I had was stepping onto that crosswalk. After that, flashes, the car, collapsing, the void, the shocks. Everything was jumbled like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite fit together. A paramedic stepped into the room and gave me a nod. I recognized his face from earlier, though it felt like I'd seen him in a dream. "You gave us a scare out there," he said. "How are you feeling?" I opened my mouth to speak, but my throat was raw. "Like I got hit by a truck," I croaked. He chuckled softly. "Not far off. Your body's been through a lot. Cardiac arrest can be brutal." There it was, the phrase, again cardiac arrest. I'd heard it before, sure, but it wasn't something I ever thought would apply to me. I mean, I was only 14 back then. Cardiac arrest was something that happened to older people, not kids walking home from school. The paramedic must have noticed the confusion on my face. "You know what that is, right?" he asked, pulling up a chair. My heart stopped," I managed. "Yeah," he nodded. "But it's not the same thing as a heart attack. What you had was called ventricular fibrillation, or VFib. It's when your heart's electrical signals go out of control, and the ventricles, the lower chambers of your heart, start fluttering instead of pumping. Blood stops flowing, and if no one steps in with CPR and defibrillation, well," he didn't need to finish that sentence. I swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling in. "So, I could have—" "Yeah," he said simply. "You were lucky. Really lucky. Less than 10% of people survive an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest like that, and even fewer walk away without serious brain damage." The room felt colder suddenly. I looked down at my hands, flexing my fingers as if to confirm I was still all here. My heart had literally short-circuited, and I'd been saved by a machine shocking me back to life. It was surreal, terrifying. Over the next few days, the medical team filled in more details. They explained how cardiac arrest is different from a heart attack, which is more about blocked arteries causing pain and damage to the heart muscle. Cardiac arrest, on the other hand, is like flipping a circuit breaker. 1 second, your heart is working fine. The next, everything shuts down without warning. The symptoms can hit fast. Sudden dizziness, lightheadedness, sometimes a racing heartbeat. For some people, there's no warning at all. You just collapse. That's exactly what happened to me. They said I probably had a few seconds of severe dizziness before I blacked out completely. Apparently, someone nearby had called 911 right away, and that quick response saved my life. The paramedics performed CPR to keep oxygen flowing to my brain until they could shock my heart back into rhythm with a defibrillator. They told me that CPR isn't pretty, it's rough and intense, and it can even break ribs. But without it, the chances of survival drop by the second. Hearing all this was overwhelming. I was 14, just a kid who'd been worried about homework and annoying teachers a few hours before. Now I was dealing with words like ventricular fibrillation and defibrillation. My brain struggled to process how close I'd come to the edge of, well, not being here anymore. In the weeks that followed, the physical recovery wasn't the hardest part. Sure, I was sore as hell, my chest hurt from the compressions, and I had a nasty headache for days. But it was the mental scars that hit me hardest. At night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that place, the cold, endless void I'd been trapped in. It wasn't fire and demons like some people imagine. It was worse. It was nothingness. Just me and the suffocating silence, like I didn't exist anymore. I started having panic attacks. I'd wake up gasping for air, convinced my heart had stopped again. Loud noises would trigger flashbacks to the shocks from the defibrillator. I couldn't cross that intersection without feeling phantom chills crawling up my spine. It was like my body remembered every second of the trauma, even when my mind tried to block it out. I didn't talk about it much. I mean, how do you explain to people that you felt like you'd touched the edge of existence? That you'd seen a version of hell where time and space didn't matter anymore? Over the years, I learned how to cope. Therapy helped. So did educating myself on cardiac arrest and survival trauma. I read stories from other survivors who had experienced similar things: visions, out-of-body sensations, the feeling of being pulled between life and whatever comes next. I wasn't alone in that. By the time I was 25, I'd made peace with the experience. I still get flashbacks sometimes, but they don't paralyze me anymore. In a weird way, the whole thing gave me a new perspective. Life isn't guaranteed. It's fragile, hanging by a thread of electric impulses and oxygen flow. One glitch, one missed beat, and everything can change. But that fragility also makes life precious. I think about that whenever I'm stuck in the grind, when work stresses me out or I'm frustrated over something stupid. I remind myself that I was given another shot. I fought to be here, and I'm not going to waste it. So, yeah, if there's one takeaway from all this, it's simple. Cherish your time, appreciate the small moments, even the annoying ones. You never know when something unexpected could pull the rug out from under you. And if you ever see someone collapse, call 911. Start CPR if you know how. You might just save a life. After all, someone saved mine.